Let's go ahead and somewhat get started. We'll take some time to let other folks go ahead and get in here as well. But welcome to the fifth episode of Teaching in a Digital World. Tonight's topic is differentiation. We'll give people a few more moments to get logged in. As you're waiting, would you please read the alert message on the screen and answer in the chat box? I will also have time for questions and answers at the end. And then you'll notice on this title slide that there is a tiny URL that'll give you a direct link to this presentation. It will probably force you to make a copy, but you can access this slide with this link. I'm going to go ahead and drop the link into the chat. That way you guys can access that PowerPoint later if you need to. Hey, Marion Walsh, I like that last name. Welcome. Thanks everyone for hopping in and introducing yourselves. Instructional coaches. Let's see. Principals. Hello, Mr. LaPlante. Hi, Mr. Niemeyer. Hello from Whiteland. Hi, Danny. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. Hi there, Amber Walters, sitting out on your back patio. Looks wonderful. All right, let's go ahead and get started. All right. All right, so greetings. Thank you for taking time to join us tonight for our fifth episode of Teaching in a Digital World. My name is Matt Walsh, Academic Specialist for the Indiana Department of Education. As we get started, I wanted to remind you of a few housekeeping details. So today, when we're in our room, please keep yourself muted as we expect a lot of different attendees. If you did not hear the audio, click on audio in the toolbar at the top of your screen, and then select if you would like to connect to audio via your computer or by phone. Go ahead and keep your camera off to preserve bandwidth. If you see yourself on the screen, your video is on. You can still wave at me. That's great. I love that. Right-click on your name in the participant list and click on Stop Video. Please use the chat to ask questions, make comments, and connect with other participants. I'm excited for the number of attendees tonight. IDOE is recording this webinar, and we will release the recording as soon as possible with closed captions. You will have access to all recorded webinars in this series by visiting the link that I am about to drop into the chat here. All right, so a couple links already in here to get you guys started. The mission of IDOE's digital learning team is to support educators developing the competencies necessary to provide Indiana students with high-quality digital learning experiences, both in person and in a virtual environment. High-quality digital learning experiences can occur in person and in virtual settings. Remote learning experiences happen when the student and the teacher are separated by space and possibly by time. And blended learning occurs when digital learning experiences are incorporated into the traditional classroom setting. You may have also used the term hybrid model. This mode of instruction can also be described as synchronous learning and asynchronous learning. Synchronous learning happens in real time with online tools such as Zoom and Google Meet. And synchronous learning occurs usually within a learning management system, or LMS, often without real-time interaction with the teacher. Our objectives for tonight are simple. We will define and explore differentiated instruction. For many of you, this may be a reminder of what you already know. We will discuss how to plan for adaptations of differentiated instruction to a student-centered digital learning environment and provide resources for structuring differentiated lessons in a digital learning environment. As we go through the webinar, you may have additional resources or questions that you would like to share. Please add them to the chat. We will work to answer questions during and at the end of the session. If we do not have the answers for everything live, we will work to follow up with answers you need. Again, our mission is to support you in providing high quality digital learning experiences for your students. So let's get started. Let's go ahead and take a moment and respond to this screen in the chat. When you see the words differentiated instruction, what does that mean for you? What is your past or present experience with differentiated instruction? Oh yeah, keywords popping up here: scaffolding, individual needs, meeting learners, knowing the level of your students, readiness levels, strategies. You guys basically wrote the book already. Changing instruction to meet needs. We'll talk about how to do some real good quick changing in a lesson plan as needed. Adjusting. All right, this is great. Now I know what I'm working with. Thank you so much. Let's go forward here. As anticipated, the reactions to the differentiated instructions were right on and spot on. But in order to be intentional about how we use our knowledge of differentiation and what we know about best practices, we must ensure that we are clear about its purpose. For our overarching purpose here tonight, you will hear me quote the work of Carol Ann Tomlinson often. She is an educator, and you may have heard of her. She's from the University of Virginia. Tomlinson states in her book, How to Differentiate Instruction in Mixed Ability Classrooms, that differentiated instruction is intentionally providing different avenues for acquiring content, processing ideas, and developing products so that students learn effectively. Everything that is shared tonight certainly fits with one of these elements of instruction. In the end, differentiated instruction is about student access to learning. We all know that success breeds success. So when students have access and experience success, they want to learn. So let's discuss further what differentiation instruction is and build upon some of the things that you mentioned in the chat. Then, a bit later, let's look at how I would argue you are using differentiation instruction maybe even more often than you think you are. Differentiated instruction is proactive and intentional. I use the word intentional often when working with educators, and our session tonight will not be any different. Differentiation is dependent upon assessment. For the work of differentiation, that would mean any type of formative. It could include the standard quiz, checklists, observations, answers to in-lesson questioning, rubrics, etc. Whatever can provide you with data can inform your instruction and when to differentiate. We will go into a bit more detail about assessment shortly, but I would like for you to be thinking about what you do for assessment and how that assessment connects to your digital environment. Differentiation is diverse in its approach. We can get at student learning needs by thinking about access to content, processing information, and demonstrating understanding with appropriate products. By now, you can probably see that differentiated instruction is certainly student-centered, and it can be executed during any part of a lesson, including direct and whole group instruction, guided practice, and independent instruction. Let's take a look at how you can leverage what you already are doing so that you can recognize its connection to differentiated instruction. Since the term differentiated instruction made its debut a couple of decades ago, American educators have become very adept to using data to inform instruction. High stakes testing and grades issued for schools based on student achievement have created a culture of using data. I would argue that has paid off as we are more savvy in our work. Teachers are the experts, and here are some of the ways teachers are using data to inform instruction. Teachers are now using all types of formative assessment to direct instruction. As a former school administrator and instructional coach, I'd watch teachers design all types of formative assessments. One particular instance I remember was a grade 8 social studies teacher who had students write a short paragraph expressing what they knew about a topic. He circulated as the students wrote, and I asked him what he was looking for. He stated that he wanted to see 5 key words in this paragraph that the students were writing. I watched him pivot with the class when he learned about 10 students did not sufficiently meet his criteria. He posted another question to the rest of the class and quickly retaught the concept differently to the other students. After he quickly assessed the reteach, the class then regrouped and moved on. He quickly differentiated his instruction to give students a different means of accessing content and processing that information. Sorry, I'm having a little technical visual difficulty here. Okay, here we go. I apologize for that. Students love to share what their interests are. Surveys can track this for us. We can keep this student feedback in mind when we need to plan for the products students might produce, the access to content in research, or when we need to enrich them. And I wanted to share that on this presentation slide, you'll see that a few of these stars or whammo um, symbols have links to them so that you can do a little bit more research and understanding about what some of these pieces are. Interest surveys, pre-assessments, and hinge questions. Speaking of pre-assessments, pre-assessments can be used to anticipate what we may need to compact for our students or tier their instruction. I can recall a time when I was teaching 7th grade social studies, and I began to notice that over the years that students would come to that unit with a bunch of prior knowledge. Many students seem to have a natural curiosity for the ancient Egyptians. My pre-assessment before the unit indicated that some students mastered much of the content and the standards and thus needed enrichment. This is when I would place students on a learning contract. While this worked well for me, I was very strategic in what I was asking for on the pre-assessment. In Thomas Guskey's work on mastery learning, he has shared that there is research that suggests pre-assessments must be used effectively so that they are beneficial to instruction. He states that we are required to think carefully about what students need to begin their learning journey and then take specific steps to remedy any identified deficits. Short, informal pre-assessments followed by brief reviews hold great promise for students, especially when students understand the purpose is to ensure their success. Hinge questions are the critical questions that check for understanding in order to find out where misunderstandings are occurring in the lesson. Fletcher Wood states that hinge questions are the moments where a teacher moves from one key point to another, and if that content before the hinge question is not understood, then the next part of the lesson will most likely fail. You may be able to see how a hinge question helps a teacher understand access to content. We then decide how to re-access that content in a different way during the lesson, dependent upon what the answers are from the hinge question. So I'd like to take a moment here in the chat, if you could take a moment to reflect, and I want you to think about an upcoming lesson, and maybe perhaps in that chat, in the key part of that lesson, can you come up with or think about in that lesson where the students have to have critical knowledge about what they're learning and before they move on, is there any type of a question that you could come up? Could you think you might be able to share what you think might be a good hinge question in a recent lesson or a lesson that's coming up? If you wouldn't mind, go ahead and drop that into the chat box if you think you've got one. I see we're having some problems with accessing the PowerPoint link. Oh, thanks, Danny. Danny's telling the class, hey, list 3 things you must consider before using any tool in the workshop or a lab. Okay. This is probably really important too, because that might be telling us too what the if the students understand the safety of different things as well. Thanks, Danny. All right, as you consider those or think about those, or if one pops in your head, if you're a processor like me, sometimes it comes to you a little bit later. Feel free to go ahead and drop that in the chat. Let's continue on. IEPs and ILPs. This is pretty much a given for differentiation, but individual education plans and individual language plans for English learners provide us with information we need to plan for content, process, and product considerations. Professional learning communities permit teachers to share in the development of differentiated instruction. Since PLCs know the curriculum and understand how students in previous years have performed and look at formative and summative data, it can decide where and when differentiation should occur on a team. Standardized assessments can assist with high-level planning. It provides direction for the learner needs of a classroom. It may assist with flexible grouping and interventions. SEL, social emotional learning. Today, in the world where we teach, we understand the need to know that the emotional state of a child could also impact the learning and impact their readiness levels. And the learning environment needs to be taken into consideration as well. All right. So it is, according to Carol Ann Tomlinson, the teacher's job to make explicit whatever you thought was implicit. Later, I will share a strategy with you that will help you with this during these times. And again, this is me talking about the whole idea of being very intentional about what we do with our planning. Okay. When we plan for instruction, Tomlinson states that we need to plan with content, process, and product in mind. I use the phrase in mind because it should be like a filter for your planning. As the expert, you are deciding what needs to be differentiated, when differentiation occurs, and to what extent something needs to be differentiated. You are in control of this. So in planning, let's think about what each element is. Content is the input of curriculum. Process is the sense making while students work with the content. And product is the long term demonstration of understanding, typically very summative in nature. As lesson plans are constructed or learning teams are designing units of study, teachers can consider these characteristics as entry points for differentiation. Many of you do this in your plan already, but I firmly believe that if we take tonight, step back a little bit, reflect on what we're doing, name our actions, and then we become more intentional about work. We can see this in the chart that when we may need to be more intentional about planning for differentiated instruction. As we move down this chart, we're beginning to see a few examples of how to do differentiation. Let's take a look at a few examples. In the first column under content, in the how-to section, compacting. Compacting is when we recognize that we have different readiness levels in students' abilities or understanding of content. For those students who show higher levels of readiness, we may want to think in ways of sifting out curricular components that they already know. Tiered instruction, again, is about readiness or perhaps even interest. Formative data may suggest that the need to have students work with content in various ways or at different levels of rigor. This may also be a time during instruction where scaffolding is provided. This way of thinking allows each student to excel at their own level of complexity while focusing on the same essential understandings. Take a moment to read through this chart, and I'll go ahead and give you a link to the chart as well. Actually, this link I'm going to drop in while you're looking over the chart is actually the link that's about tiered instruction, and this actually comes from the Indiana Department of Education. In keeping with being intentional about instruction, I want to take a moment to capture what we've talked about to this point. Being intentional, elements of differentiated instruction, and the extent to which we already use differentiated instruction. Each row represents when teachers intentionally plan in lesson planning, in unit planning, and with levels of intervention. When you do this, you may be thinking what this means for your planning and what you need to be mindful of. I have shared what some of my thoughts are in the second column as I would be planning. And in the third column, I begin to think about what that means in regards to the elements of differentiation. As you read through this, it may sound like this as you think. In planning, when I anticipate the moments in my lesson plan when students may have trouble understanding, I use hinge questions to plan for students who get it and for those who don't. Or I might be thinking this way. In unit planning, when I work with my colleagues to determine how students will demonstrate mastery or proficiency, I often have to provide a summative that considers student learning needs. These are just different ways of being intentional about our planning and the ways that we think. Now, let's take what we know and identify some strategies. We will name a few, but there are so many, many more available to you. Now that we've analyzed where differentiation instruction is a part of the instructional process, let's name a few tools about differentiated instruction. These tools or strategies are just the tip of the iceberg. This table shares a strategy, provides for its rationale, and shares tips for using them. While we discuss a few of these, I'd like for you to think about two things. Number one, how might these strategies play out in a digital learning environment? And two, if you are aware of more strategies and have a resource for us, please post a link or an idea in the chat. Let's talk about a raft. A raft is one of my favorite tools. A raft is a tool that may serve all types of needs. A raft stands for role, audience, format, and task, or sometimes topic. It can provide a vast amount of choice for students, or it can be a bit more controlled as a teacher looks for students to demonstrate a specific skill or understanding. In just a second, I will show you an example of an elementary science raft that provides a lot of choices. Teachers may control many parts of the raft, such as the topic. What skills is the teacher going to decide that they need to make sure that students understand, and what needs to be consistent? Let's take a look. All right, so I'm hoping you guys can see this on your screen, and I'm hoping I can get back to my presentation after this, but here's what we got. So this is from a school district outside of Indiana, but the first part just talks about what a raft is, and that is something that you can come back to and read about. But what you can see at the top is that um, we have the purpose, how students are able to do it, and how things can be adapted. But I want to scroll down to the second page. And in the second page, you'll see that we have this is a third grade unit, a desert unit, that students were studying. And what I like about this is the teachers on this team, Mrs. Schraring, Ms. Stoll, Mrs. Sandvoss, have put together a writing assignment that simply has the students pretending that they are a saguaro cactus. And if you read through this, it just says pretend that you're a saguaro cactus. Using what you've learned about this type of cactus, create an advertisement that announces what you have that you have rooms available for rent. Your advertisement should include all the information an animal would need to know about the rooms for rent, as well as where to contact you if you're interested. The voice of your advertisement is the saguaro cactus. Your audience is animals that use the saguaros as their homes. So they're asked to be creative and they have to sell themselves. So, for instance, if you take what they've written here and then actually go down to this chart, um, you can see how this plays out. The role is saguaro cactus, animals are the audience, the format is an advertisement, and the topic is rooms for rent. Now, what you can also see here is that if the teacher group decided they wanted to open up this concept of the desert unit to more roles and different audiences, different formats, they can do that as well. Or in some cases, teachers may decide they want to control what the format is and let the other things be the choices for the students. Or they may want to control the topic. So RAFs provide teachers and students different choices based upon what the learning needs and the instructions is. Okay. All right. I think I got back to the presentation. Okay. All right. Let's talk about another one called the detergent method. A detergent method is a quick planning tool that allows for tiered instruction where content, process, and product may be differentiated. It's important to be reminded that strategies for differentiation are the norm. Using well-known detergents as comparisons become the basis for grouping students. A student's understanding of content is then matched to the detergent. Students assigned to a tide group may be the group that feels overwhelmed like a wave or a tide coming in and they're struggling. This is where the teacher would teach differently and scaffold for this group. The gain group, capital G gain, is the group of students that are on track for learning and can most likely work through guided practice on its own. As you might assume, the students are gaining in their understanding. And the last group is the cheer group, and they are the ones that may have demonstrated mastery pretty quickly. They are provided enrichment learning. And so, as a side note, when we talk about gain and tide and cheer, we've also got to make sure that the environment is one where students can learn and know that learning from mistakes and different pacing for learning is completely normal and acceptable and actually even celebrated. Let's take a look at a simple template that a teacher might use to organize the detergent method. This is one of my favorites that I used to use in the classroom as well, and it's pretty quick and it's easy to look at the needs of the students. And simply what you have here is just basically the different detergents down the side. Um, the notes here are just simply for the teacher to remember what they are. I don't know if I would necessarily provide that to the students. Um, and then over here in the right column, the teacher does the planning about what is going to take place or what it is that a group is going to do when they're working on their own. Okay, let me go ahead, bring us back. All right. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the learning environment. We've shared a lot tonight, but we do need to ensure that the learning environment is supportive of this work. And we just mentioned that a little bit on the last slide. Here's what we can control as the educators in the classroom, making sure that we celebrate the diversity in all its form and celebrate achievement. We assist the others and know that we can ask for assistance from our colleagues. We must let our students know that making mistakes are opportunities to learn. And we set procedures and protocols so that we can manage ourselves, students and teachers. We expect growth and rigor during differentiated exercises. and we expect that other students will educate with us. I'm sorry, other adults will educate with us. And we do learning about the obstacles. I'm sorry, we do something about the obstacles to learning, thus differentiated instruction. The learning environment is completely different for many of us today. Is digital learning a new level of differentiated instruction? I believe it probably is, and we need to strategically plan for it, be intentional, and we need to think about how the digital learning elements we've presented here help us to differentiate. Here is where I turn over the presentation to you, the educators in the field. I'm going to rely on your expertise to begin thinking about how to merge intentional differentiated instruction into a digital learning environment. While we are in a different era of teaching, I do know that we must intentionally plan for it, and I know that's what you are doing. Hopefully, I can help a little bit. In the book Teach Like a Champion, Doug Lemov shares that all teachers should use a process known as double planning to ensure that time on task and student engagement are at their highest levels during instruction. I know and have heard from you how difficult this is due to all that you are juggling. I have taken Lemov's work one step further for tonight. When planning for any remote learning, it may be best to start with remote learning instructional plans because it may be more efficient to adapt that work into in-person learning. And we understand too that our plans and our schedules are constantly changing. So let's try to do, I guess, what we can to make that process more efficient. So in this slide that we have here, um, the left column is a list of effective components for effective lesson design. I won't go into much detail with these except to mention that guided practice is a time for students to process and make mistakes. So in step one and in step two, we should be asking ourselves when we're planning, what tools will help me differentiate in these various stages? For instance, would the detergent method provide for flexible grouping with direct instruction? As we plan, we are also in a constant cycle of asking questions and seeking formative data. And in step three, this is where the teacher is actually planning what he or she is doing in the lesson, and it should correspond with the other parts of the lesson as well. I have provided some tips. I have provided some tips here, and in this planning, we need to connect the elements of differentiated instruction to the digital tools that support this work. Let's share in the chat and answer some of these questions that are posted for us. What tools are you now using that would support the various aspects of differentiated instruction? Things that we've mentioned here tonight or things that you would like for us to see? And how would they best work themselves into a lesson design process? What are some technological things or things that you are doing um, that would support differentiated instruction in the learning environment? So, we are approaching the end of this presentation. But I've said this before, if you're a processor like me, you like to think more about your work. I've put a Padlet together, and some of you may be familiar with these, that you may access for free by either following this link that's actually on this presentation, and I'm going to drop it in for you, or via the QR code that is on this slide as well. When you access the Padlet, the goal is to share what you know about digital learning and now differentiated instruction. I've set up the Padlet in three columns that focus on differentiated instruction elements and different school levels like elementary or secondary. And then to focus the conversation, I've provided a sentence starter that you might want to use to help in your reflection. You certainly do not have to use the sentence starter. So we're going to go to the Padlet. I'm going to at least share that with you, but that way you can carry this conversation on beyond this presentation. Feel free to add any contact information you want or other questions that you might want addressed. And if you don't, you can stay anonymous, and that's fine as well. So let's take a quick look at this Padlet. And I see that people are also actually still dropping in some in the chat, some ideas about different tools that work to support differentiated instruction. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Let's go to the Padlet. Let's see here. Dropping, dropped. And let me see if I can go ahead and pull this up. All right. And so this is a pretty simple thing to use. And I could see it being something that we would use in the classroom as well. But I'm just sitting here, I'm thinking that for tonight, in order to carry on with this conversation, if you'd like, here are the three columns that I mentioned: elementary, secondary, and then I also added one that was a little more content specific. So if you want to, let's say you're a PE health teacher and you want to address um, any level of PE or health instruction, you could drop that there. So my sentence starters are just simply this: when I use blank, like let's say Flipgrid, like that Danny shared in the chat, um, it would assist me with differentiation of, let's say, uh, content, because it allows me to do what with the students, or it allows me to plan for this. So these are just some sentence starters to kind of capture what we talked about today and bring things together, and then maybe hopefully people can add some ideas to the Padlet themselves if they would like to do that. So I'll leave this up here and running. Hopefully it's something that you guys can access, and we'll go from there. And I did test it; it should be accessible. All right. But yeah, we would love to see this conversation continue. I know some of the questions that we asked are pretty thoughtful and might take a little bit extra time to think about. So let's go ahead and oh, I see an earpod hopping into the Padlet. All right. Maybe that's Emily Bruning. I'm not sure. We'll see here. All right. So we'll let her continue on with that. And as we move forward, I'm going to pull this back to our presentation. And actually, um, this is a time where people can go ahead and ask some questions. I do have a few slides after this, but if you want to post them in the chat box, or even unmute yourself and ask, we'll be happy to answer or try to find some answers for you. And as you're doing that, I'll move forward here just a little bit, and feel free to pop in, interrupt, drop things in the Padlet while you're listening, or drop things into the chat. Next slide is just the list of differentiated citations, so that you can access some of these, some of the research and some of the practices behind some of the things that I've shared. And this is for you a resource that just simply shares what is known as the teaching and learning team um, at the Indiana Department of Education. Dr. Jensen leads all of us here, and as a part of that, we have the different folks and their different expertise listed on our teaching and learning team, and you can see the different specialists there and what they do and what they assist with. Um, let's see here, and it's a great team to work with. All right, let's see here. And then I was asked to go ahead and share that we also have some more digital learning episodes that are up and coming. I'll leave this posted here for just a second, so maybe you can catch some dates. Um, and then if not, certainly you'll be able to access this on the website. I'm going to go back to the chat for a minute to see if we have any questions going on there. Oh, it looks like Jennifer Watson's saying that she's going to show Nearpod in the next digital episode on digital citizenship. That'll be great. Thanks, Jennifer, for doing that. Let's do this. So if we don't have any more questions, let's see here. Then I guess we are done for this evening. Thank you very much.